So, welcome back, guys. Now, for this lesson, I want to cover adding a split to our tree and adding some hand-drawn trees or hand-drawn branches, and then moving on to using some mesh forces and forces. So firstly, let's hide all of these nodes that we don't want to see. We can select them and press H to hide them. Just grab these guys. And press H again if we want to show them. But let's hide everything apart from the trunk for now. So we will select the trunk and go to the skin tab. We'll scroll down to the split section and set the chance to 1. Obviously, this isn't quite what we want. So we'll set the length to 7. It's just a little long for the moment. In the spine tab, jump to the skin section and remove the fall off that we have here in the radius. Set this to max. Cool. So if I switch back on the branches now, it's not quite what we want. And what I'll do is I'll create a branch node just for these splits. So just to extend these splits. So if I set the frequency on these branches here to 0 in the generation tab, and make sure that extend parent is set to any, I'll just bump up the length in the spine tab, something like 12 should be fine. And set this percentage of parent to 1. Cool. I just want to also set the radius to be a little bit bigger in the skin tab, just to stop it from getting too thin at the top. So it's a little twisted at the moment. I'll just reduce the noise to fix this. If I go to the noise section in the spine tab, we'll just take this down some. Cool. The other thing I want to do is change the angle of this split. So if I go back to the trunk node and the skin tab, we can set these both to something like 0.3. We can also change the balance so one is slightly bigger than the other. It just adds a little bit more realism. So this looks much better and it will serve as a great base. Let's switch back on the next branching node. I'll set the mode back to interval, set the frequency to 1, and the counts to 6. I'll also increase the spread a little, so everything isn't stuck together. And the spiral. On the spine tab, let's set the length to 2. And increase the start angle a little bit, just to something like 0.5. I also want to change the graph so it affects more of the tree at the base. So if I lift these up at the bottom, that feels a bit better. And then nearer the top, they start to become a little straighter. They're also a little thin at the moment, so let's thicken them up. Oh. Skin tab. And I'll go to the graph here, and I'll just lift it up a little. And I'll set the amount to something like 0.2. And the percentage of parent to 0.1. Awesome. So moving on, let's start to adjust the branches that come later. So I'll turn these back on. And they are a little erratic at the moment, so let's fix it. They're a little short, so we'll go to the spine tab and boost the length. 2 is fine. I'm also not too keen on the spacing here, so let's change some of these settings. I'll change the spacing to 0.5 and the balance to something like 0.3 and the align. That looks a bit better. And I'll also add one more layer of branches. I just want another one before the twigs here. So let me just copy and paste this and drop it back on top. I'll grab all of these nodes and move them on top of these branches here. Nice. I'll adjust the length on this one. It's a little long, so let's just change this back to 0. And reduce the spacing a little bit, so we get a little more. Nice. Now, if I turn back on these twigs, just to take a look at what it looks like now, and we look from the side, it doesn't look too appealing. There are some bald patches, and now one thing we can do, and we will do, is add some more branches. But the other thing we can do is to hand draw some branches and create some custom ones to make sure that they're coming out in the right place. So to do this, I'll hide everything but the first 2 nodes, just so I can see a bit better. And pick a spot, just any spot that you like. If you hold down space and click, this branch will appear, this new branch here. And there are 2 ways to affect this. You can just grab the white diagonal shape here, and you can pull it out, and you will be given these Bezier handles that you can play with to choose the shape. Another thing you can do, if you don't want to do that, is whilst hovering over this guy here, if this disappears, the rectangle disappears, you can tap space and it should bring it back up. And then, whilst holding space, you can drag out the shape of the branch. So let me just do this. And you can see we are given a lot more nodes to play with here. We can use all of these if we want, or we can delete some if we have too many. Just select them and delete them. And then we can play with the shape a little easier. So this branch also has all of the same options as the previous branch. We can go inside and go to skin, for example, and increase the parent. And we can also at any time go back and change its shape. Cool. I'll just turn these guys back on so you can see what they look like. And the last thing I'll do is just copy and paste these nodes here, and we can apply them to the new hand-drawn branch. So copy and paste and drag them on top. Awesome. Whilst I'm here, I'll also reduce the size of these leaves as they're throwing off the scale a little bit. So let me just reduce the size. Here and here. Okay, so to add a new force, we would just click on the forces button here. And I'll add a directional force. We can use the viewport gizmo to move it around. Just pressing W to get into the translation option, E for rotation and R for scale. It won't be active yet though, as we do this on a node by node basis. So if I select this branch here, for instance, and I go to the spine tab, I can activate direction. And you can see that the branch starts to bend in the direction that this icon is facing. And this is pretty awesome, as it means we can affect only certain nodes, and it means that we can create certain looks. So direction is just one of the options that we have. We also have magnet, which of course attracts the tree or the branches to the icon. I'll turn off some of these options here just to speed this up. Some of these nodes, sorry. So next up we have the knurl, the twist and the curl, and these are all dependent on the rotation of the icon. So the knurl will add some more noise. The twist will of course add twist along the axis in which you are pointing this in. And the curl itself will just try and bend the branches around the direction of this icon. We have planar, which tries to flatten these off, and this is icon dependent, so let me just rotate this out and set the strength pretty high so you can see what we get here. And it tries to align these along an axis. I'll skip return for now and I'll go to season light, and this just attracts the tree towards the icon again, kind of like the magnet. But it's more to represent the sun or the sun position. We have the wind, which is again quite like the direction type. And finally we have, I'll skip knockout and just jump straight to mesh. So mesh forces are really useful, as there are times when the art director and the director have previously signed off a concept that they quite like, a certain shape that they're trying to match, and it's up to us to try and recreate that. So mesh forces allow us, well, forces I guess, and mesh forces allow us to try and get more art directed with our tree shape. So to add a mesh force, the first thing I need to do is import a model. Now you could create anything you like in your modeling package of choice, but SpeedTree also has some presets. So if I go to import mesh asset, I can just grab the sphere. And we have a handy mesh wizard here, but for now we will do nothing, as we can do this manually and I can show you what each one does. Press OK. And again, it won't affect it yet for two reasons. One, we don't have the sphere applied to this force yet, so we'll go to the mesh drop down here and select sphere. And we'll also activate it for the tree. So if we select these nodes and within the spine tab, turn on mesh. Cool. So we have a few options to play with here. If I go back into the mesh force, again we can use the gizmos in the viewport to move this around. And we haven't quite told it to do anything yet. So what we can do is use this to attract or avoid or remove parts of the tree. So this is really useful for creating things like vines or trees growing around objects, or as it mentioned previously, to help us manipulate the shape. So the first thing we'll look at is the avoid. And you can see as we move this around, the tree will do its best to move out the way. If we increase the strength, it will try even harder. Now, if we want it to completely get out the way, then we can set this instead of none on the collide action, we can set it to obstruct. Let me just make sure we have this active here. We don't. That's better. Okay, so it really tries to get out the way, especially on obstruct. If I go back to none and take the strength down, you can see what it was doing previously. This way we can move it just a little bit out of the way, but not entirely. But yes, if we set this to obstruct, it will entirely avoid it. It's a bit satisfying doing this. We can also say that any part of the branch or the tree that can't get out of the way of this mesh object is either pruned or stopped. If we set this to pruned on the collide action, then it will just remove the branches. If we set it to stop, then it tries to interpret the branches. So you can see it just makes like smaller versions of them. We can get a little further specific too. We can only keep the objects that miss or hit the mesh. That's hit or miss. If we reset these options and go back to the force action, we can switch it to attract, and you'll see that we get the tree growing towards the object. So set this back to all, none, and put this to attract. So again, it's trying to move towards the sphere or the mesh. But if we wanted to entirely avoid it, then we set this back to obstruct. And now you can see it's trying to get around the mesh, almost as if it is growing around the mesh. If it's still not strong enough, we can increase the strength. And it will begin to stick to the surface. Awesome, so there are some more that we can do with these meshes, but that's all I wanted to cover here. The last thing I'll do, apart from turning off this mesh force, is just to add some more branches to give this tree some coverage. Then we jump to these guys, take the threshold down. That's a bit better. Maybe overkill. Cool. Okay, thanks guys.